Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to PowerFX to the People. We'll be talking about all things PowerFX this afternoon, something that I'm super passionate about. I'd like for this to be as interactive as possible. So even though we're online, if you have a question, if there's anything that isn't clear, anything that you would do differently or have done differently in PowerFX or in the Power Platform, just come off mute and call out. And yeah, I'd like these to be as interactive as possible. So as Raghavan mentioned, I'm Nathan Rose. I'm a lead consultant at Capgemini here in Auckland. I work with the Power Platform, Dynamics 365, CE, and Azure every day. And I'm incredibly passionate about using the Power Platform to solve difficult challenges for my clients. So in terms of our journey together today, we'll go through three major topics. So firstly, I'll cover what is PowerFX, why you should care about this, why I think it's such a big deal, and why I'm so passionate about it. Then we'll get into what you can do with PowerFX. We'll get hands-on. I'll do a bit of a demo. I'll take you through some of the latest features, modern commanding, formula columns, dataverse actions, when and why to use it. There may be a cameo from ChatGPT, so stay tuned. And then we'll wrap up in terms of where this is all going, what this means for you in terms of your role, whether you're a developer, a consultant, citizen dev. So first things first, what is PowerFX? PowerFX is Microsoft's low-code natural language formula-based language that they use across the Power Platform to configure it. So you use human-friendly commands, and you don't have to be a professional dev. You can be a citizen dev or an app maker to use it. So it's designed to work very much like Excel. So it's a familiar type experience for users. But that begs the natural question, why should I care about this? Why is this so important? Why is Nathan so passionate about it? Why am I constantly posting on LinkedIn with all the things you can do about it? And in order to do that, first we need to set the stage. So it's probably no secret to you that there's a massive shortage of software developers worldwide. The figure that I was able to find online is that this is tipped to be as many as 85 million unfilled software dev jobs by 2030. And while it's good for people like you and me who have technical skills, we have good job security, good career prospects, the reality is that this is not so great for business and for society overall. The, the shortage of developers lengthens development cycles, reduces quality, raises costs, stifles innovation, and ultimately it's holding us back as in business and society. We can't achieve the things we want to simply because we can't write the software that we need to get to where we want to go. So that's the scene that PowerFX is entering into. However, as I was preparing for this session, it reminded me of something that I learned in history class when I was back in school. And that is we've been here before. So from your history classes at school, you may remember learning about a guy called Thomas Malthus. Malthus was an economist pre-industrial revolution back in the UK, and he's most famous for his prediction that the population of the earth was going to grow exponentially more than the food supply and that everyone was going to starve to death. Now, the fact that you and I are attending this session this afternoon tends to cast a bit of doubt on Malthus's theory. He didn't quite account for innovation in his model, and about the time he died was the time that we started to see massive innovation in terms of agriculture. It was about the time that the Industrial Revolution really got underway, and so TLDR, Malthus was wrong. However, I thought it might be useful to take Malthus's model here and shoehorn our world into it, our world of software development of apps. And so what we've seen in the last few years is an exponential uplift in the apps that we need as society, as businesses, governments, nonprofits. We need a massive amount of software applications to fuel the things that we need to do as a society, and that's grown exponentially. However, the number of software developers has really grown in a linear fashion, and so we're well past the point of crisis, if you will, and we've got this massive gap between the apps we need and the available software developers to code it. However, we've started to see a number of low and no code platforms become available from various software vendors. And of course, all of us here today love and work with the Microsoft Power Platform, and these are starting to come in to fill the gap. And I see PowerFX as being an absolutely critical cornerstone in filling this gap between the apps we need and the available software developers. Because at the end of the day, it's all well and good to be able to create tables and columns and Dataverse and add them to forms and Power Apps. But sooner or later, users need to do stuff. And that's what PowerFX lets you do. It lets you write some really simple Excel type formulas to do stuff in your apps. And so if we account for PowerFX in this model, I my firm belief is that this is going to be the catalyst that starts closing this app gap, the gap between the apps we need and the available people to create them. And so if we look at this another way, so this is a graph I pulled down from a company called Chief Martech, and they look at things such as the democratization of technology, and their basic premise is that over time, as technology gets easier to use and you don't have to necessarily be a pro dev to create create applications, we can create more apps in faster time. And so I believe we are right here. We are just on the cusp of this tipping point, this inflection point, if you will, where we're going to be able to create a massive amount of apps that we need in our society, and we're going to be able to do it far faster. And again, I see PowerFX as filling into that gap to fuel this, to power it. And so that's why I am incredibly excited and passionate about PowerFX and the things that you can do with it. So that's the scene, if you will. That's why I think this is so important. So any does anyone have any questions before we segue into the demo? Okay. So so we'll hop into the demo. So what we'll go through today is I'll take you through modern commanding, database Dataverse formula columns, Dataverse actions, and as I alluded to earlier, there may be a cameo from ChatGPT. So we'll pop into my model-driven app here, and the first thing we'll go through is modern commanding. Now, when we open up a record, you're you're likely very familiar with the command ribbon, and we've got things like save and delete and deactivate, and these come out of the box from Microsoft. These are the legacy commands that we're all quite familiar with. However, Microsoft have released something called modern commanding that uses PowerFX, and that's these that I've added to the ribbon here. And these let you do some really cool things with PowerFX formulas. For example, I can create shortcuts to zip around the app. I can create new rows, or I can combine features together. So this is a split button that has some um, additional functionality in it. But what I'm going to do with this when I click this is it actually combines all three of these. And so what it's going to do is it's going to launch LinkedIn and Google search results with this contact's name. It's going to create an opportunity link to them, and it's going to toggle these fields from no to yes on the record, which is going to hide this button. And I'm doing that all with a single button. It's also going to give me a notification in the app. So when I go ahead and click it, you can see that it's popped up Google search results. We've got our notification that's going to auto disappear. So we can search Google with the name of the contact. We can search LinkedIn with the name of the contact. And when I come back here to the record, you can see that the buttons disappeared. When I come here to my opportunities, you can see that we've just created one just now with some details that I've populated from that button. And when I come back here to the record, if I toggle these back from yes to no, you can see that our button reappears. So that's modern commanding in action. And this is really cool because oftentimes when you're working on a project, the users always have a requirement for a button that does something. And this lets us do that without writing code. Traditionally, we've had to get a dev involved to write some JavaScript, possibly a plugin, depending on what they want to do. And that's all done with PowerFX. So I'll take you behind the scenes now and I'll show you how I actually put this together and the formulas that I used. So the way you get to it is you come into the Maker portal, you edit your app, and within the app you choose the table that you're working with, and there's an option here called Edit Command Bar. And once you've done that, you've got an option for the command bar you want to work with, whether it's the main grid, subgrid views. We're going to choose main form. And so this is what modern commanding looks like. Now you'll notice that the legacy commands are in here as well. You can't edit those at the moment. Those they're just there, but you can't do anything with them. My hope would be that Microsoft is either going to convert these to modern commands or make a way for us to be able to use PowerFX logic to show and hide them and do some other things with them. But if we come here to the Sales Easy button, so you can see you can give your button a label, you can use a custom icon on your button, and then you've got a choice of either running a formula or running JavaScript. So I like using PowerFX with these because I'm a functional by trade. I'm not a coder, but there are times where you may have requirements that exceed the capabilities of PowerFX, and so you do have the option to use a JavaScript web resource with these. Then in terms of visibility, you can have it always visible, or in our case, we're showing it on condition from the formula. So this is our formula bar here. If you've used Canvas apps in the Power Platform, this is a similar type of experience. So you've got IntelliSense running in the background and you type in your formulas. And you see, and you can combine some functions. So for the LinkedIn search, I need to concatenate parts of the LinkedIn URL with parts of my row in Dataverse and the last bit of the LinkedIn search URL. For Google, I just need to add parts of the Dataverse record to this URL. And then I've got my patch statements, patching the contact row, toggling these Boolean fields from no to yes, and then creating my opportunity record and setting columns on it. And then lastly, giving a notification to the user that something's happened. So this is something that I've started doing in the last few months with modern commands. This is in a lot of ways is a great feature in modern commanding because you can give a custom message to the user. You can choose the type of notification that it is, whether it's a success or a failure or just a neutral one, and it changes color. So success is green, failure is red, neutral is gray, and then you can choose in milliseconds the timeout value. That way they don't have to go manually dismiss it. So if you've used the Maker portal quite a bit for exporting solutions and publishing, you'll notice that you have to manually dismiss those banner notifications. When you use this in your model-driven apps, you don't have to do that. So it's just a nice feature for the user. And so that's modern commanding. So Any questions on that before I move on to Dataverse columns? Okay, so we'll move on to Dataverse columns in model-driven apps. And so what these are is these are kind of an upgrade, if you will, for the traditional calculated columns that we're used to in Dataverse. These use PowerFX instead of having to open up um, the the form that lets you run the calculations on your columns. And so if we go into one of our tables here, you can see that I've got some of these columns on the form. I just upgraded to the new layout. This used to show a little lock symbol next to the PowerFX columns to let you know that you can't edit them, um, but it's not showing that at the moment. But what these columns do is they let you do everything from what you've traditionally done with calculated fields to summing up data. And then you can do some really cool things with logical comparisons and throw some custom messages to the user. So let me go into another record real quick and I'll show you this in action. That's the one I want. Okay, so you can see that this has a status of predicting winner. This is just a string value that I populate. But when I start changing values here, that's going to sum up, and then it's going to start changing this based on the formula. And it's just looking at the home team and the away team and populating the name in here. So change that to 2. You can see that changes to New Zealand. If I change this to 2, gives me a value of 2 close to call. And so that's one of the cool things that you can do with these formula columns in PowerFX is that you can do your standard sums and whatnot, and then you can start pulling data together and giving some real custom messages to users in the app, which is really, really cool. One other thing I'll show you in formula columns that I've been doing lately is bringing together address address elements into a full monolithic address field. So something that I've often come up against when I'm replacing a legacy app with a model-driven app on the Power Platform is the legacy app usually has a monolithic address field because they need to do things like print letters and envelopes and things like that. And it can be a bit of a discussion point because the preference is to separate these elements into their own columns in Dataverse. And what I've found the other week is that you can actually use PowerFX to bring this all together and concatenate it nicely and give the user a monolithic address field. So that's just another example of things that you can do with Dataverse columns in PowerFX. So what we'll do now is we'll pop behind the scenes and I'll just show you the formulas that I'm using for these columns, give you an idea of how this works. So you access this through the columns in the Maker portal. When I come down here, let me find my predicted winner. And so you can see the formula type is FX. That means it's running a formula and it's going to return a string value. And so when you open this up, you can see this is my formula. So it's looking at some other columns, doing some logical comparisons, and then it's putting in either a value that I've stipulated, or it's pulling it's pulling data from a related row in Dataverse and populating that in the column. So that's what that looks like behind the scenes. So a couple things to note when you're creating these. So it will inherit the format of the type of data that you're working with in here. So if you pull in string fields and you save, then the format will always be string. If you need to change it to say a number or something like that, you'd need to create another column because at the moment it doesn't change from that inherited format from the initial data when you save the column. So I'll show you the address one. So this is just using this is just using a concatenate statement and then just pulling in these various columns from the form, and something that I generally have to remind myself is to include spaces when you're doing this, but that's what the concatenate formula looks like for that address full field. And then when you go to create these, so you just go to create a new column, and you'll see that you've got an option called formula preview. So this feature is still in preview. And then when you go to type your formula, you can see that you've got the IntelliSense just like you would in a Canvas app, and it lets you start writing your formula. So that's how the formula columns work. So a few call outs on these. At the moment, they don't, the last time I checked, which is kind of 4 to 6 weeks ago, they still don't support currencies or decimal precision. Those are things that I would hope that the Dataverse team would have ready for general availability, because it's looking like this feature is probably going to go GA sometime in the near future. So they're somewhat limited to their traditional calculated column cousins at the moment, but there are a number of functions that you can run in PowerFX in the calculated columns, and you can combine them together to do some really cool stuff. So I see this as a feature that will quickly equal the traditional calculated column and will rapidly supersede it in terms of what you can do with it. So it's one that I would advise you to start getting your hands dirty with and really start getting your head around. Okay, any questions on formula columns before I move on to Dataverse actions?
Just a quick one from me, Nathan.
Sure.
Uh, this is already like in the general availability because it says preview.
Yep.
Do you have any timelines for that?
So modern commanding is GA.
Yeah.
Formula columns are not. I don't have any visibility in terms of when this is going GA.
Okay.
But I think they're looking at sometime in the near future, but I haven't heard anything specific.
Good. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. If there's no other questions, I'll move on to Dataverse Actions. So this is a new preview feature that Microsoft released earlier this year. So this is unfortunately, this will probably be the most underwhelming part of the demo. This is a bit that I've really struggled to get my head around. But I think it does offer some really exciting options and capabilities. So I'll show you how to access it, and yeah, if any of you have used this or played with this feature, do call out, because I'm very keen to start getting my head around it. So let me go to edit my app. Yeah, okay. So I've done this in modern commands. You can also access it in Canvas apps and with custom pages. And what this does is this lets you access the synchronous Dataverse actions. So there's a number that come out of the box with the Power Platform and Dynamics, and then you can write your own custom ones as well. Now, the way you access this feature is firstly, you need to turn on the experimental feature in your app. And so the way you do that for modern commands is you open your component library. This is actually, it kind of looks like a Canvas app. And this is behind the scenes where your data and command formulas are stored for a modern command. The process works exactly the same way if whether you're working in modern commands, Canvas apps, or custom pages. So you go into your settings, upcoming features, experimental, and there's one called Dataverse Actions, and you switch that on, and that's how you access it. The next thing you need to do is on your data sources, you need to add a table called environment, and that's where you access those actions. All right, so that's how you access it. So now I'll show you what this looks like. Okay, there we go. So I've created just a sample command here called Dataverse Action. Now, at this point, the only thing that I've been able to successfully get it to do is what I've seen in the docs, which is install or uninstall sample data. But what I'll do is I'll just show you. So when you use this, when you choose environment here and you click a full stop after that, you start to see all of these actions that are available to you. And so you could do things like for if you're a no or low code app maker, you could do things like send an email directly from a Canvas app or a custom page without having to invoke Power Automate, which simplifies your app, makes life a little bit easier. Where this gets really exciting, where I think this feature is going is I believe this is here to bridge the gap between pro devs and your low code, no code functionals and app makers. So what you could do is you can have your pro devs creating custom actions in Dataverse. So you could have a library of these for people to consume in their apps. So say for example, you needed to call an API to synchronously update the exchange rate on a row in your model driven app. This would be a good way to do that because you could create an action that calls that API and then make that available to consume here in PowerFX, either through a button or in a command ribbon or in a Canvas app or a custom page or something like that. So that's the Dataverse commands. So has anyone has anyone gotten hands-on with this themselves? Has anyone created any custom APIs and used PowerFX to call them? Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's Dataverse Actions. So is there any questions on Dataverse Actions, modern commands, calculated fields, anything that I've shown you so far in PowerFX?
The Dataverse Actions is a plugin, or how is that? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you would create an action in your app, and I'm not a pro dev, so this is where I'm getting a bit out of my depth, but my guess is that you would have a plugin that you're calling,
I
something
see.
like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's interesting.
yeah, yeah. But if anybody knows differently, do call out because again, that's a starting to get a bit out of my depth when we get into pro code. So okay, well, if there's no questions, let's move on. Let's have some fun. So something that I was playing with over the weekend was was hooking up ChatGPT to a model-driven app. So if you haven't done this, there's a great video from Reza Durrani, who's an MVP based in the States, and he takes you step by step through how to create a custom connector and then hook up to ChatGPT. He does it in a Canvas app. Um, I've done this in a custom page to bring it into a model-driven app. So you saw it here first, ChatGPT running in a model-driven app. So this is my custom page here, and we can let's and this is going to start returning answers to us from ChatGPT. And so we can start giving it all kinds of questions. Same way you would do it in the OpenAI site. So it's cranking away in the background. While it's doing that, one thing that I will call out that Reza doesn't mention in his video is that you do need to be on a paid ChatGPT plan for this to work. So, but as you can see, it's gone away. It's cranked out an email for me. Now, something that I've been playing with, this hasn't quite worked for me yet, is I thought it would be really cool to be able to take this answer and transpose it into an email or into another Dataverse row. So what I've done is I've created a button here to do that. So that's gone. It's cleared this collection. But when we go over here to our ChatGPT chats, you can see it's created a row. Now, unfortunately, I'm still struggling with the exact formula to get that answer from ChatGPT in and populate it here because it's being populated into a collection. So I think there's a little bit of jiggery pokery that I need to do behind the scenes. But that's ChatGPT running in a model-driven app and using some PowerFX around it. So So I will call out. So this is looking at the art of the possible. We should probably pull back to what's responsible. And when you are using things like ChatGPT, you do need to be very aware that it is publicly available data, and anything that you put through it does become public. So you would want to be careful using this in a business application sense. So you wouldn't want customer data, any sensitive company information going through it. So use with caution, but that is ChatGPT running in a model-driven app. So something that I've been playing with over the weekend. Okay, any questions before we move on? All right. So that's the demo. So to sum it up, when you should use this. So modern commanding is a GA function. So this replaces legacy commands. So there's pretty much no reason not to use it. Whether you want to use a PowerFX formula or you want to call JavaScript, it should be able to handle anything for you. There are always exceptions. So if there were a case where it didn't meet your needs for whatever reason, you can still use legacy commands. But modern commanding is GA, and it's pretty useful. Dataverse formula columns are still in preview, so not something that I would use in production just yet. I'd wait till it goes GA. As I mentioned, they are slightly limited in terms of functionality as compared to their traditional calculated column cousins. They don't do things like currencies and decimal precision just yet. However, I do think that they are going to rapidly supersede the traditional calculated column in terms of their capabilities. As the PowerFX team are constantly adding new functions, and you can combine them and do all kinds of really crazy things with it. Personally, I find them a bit less clunky to configure than the traditional calculated columns, because you can just write your calculation as opposed to creating the column and then opening up that calculation screen. And I would encourage you to get hands-on with them, because this really is the future of the platform. These are going to become a very big deal. And then lastly, Dataverse Actions. Again, not something I'd use in prod. It's still very much an experimental feature, but this does bridge the gap between pro devs and low and no code functionals. So I would use it when you need synchronous functionality. The fact that you can write custom Dataverse actions means that you really have unlimited possibilities for how you use this. So again, if you've got a strong center of excellence and a strong citizen dev setup, you could create a library of these for people to consume in the apps that they're creating. So that's when and where to use these. And of course, ChatGPT goes without saying, use with caution. Okay, so come to the final part of our time together. What does this mean for me? So if you're a dev, a pro dev, I see PowerFX as really empowering you to freeing your time to go solve the much more difficult, complex challenges that require code. So by offloading some of the simpler things to app makers, to citizen devs, this frees you up to go solve the really hard problems and take us forward as a society. For consultants and functionals such as myself, we need to know when to harness PowerFX versus pro code. So this is an important issue that I'm coming up against quite a bit in my solutions. Personally, I come from a low and no code preference when I'm designing solutions, but that's not always the best way. Some of the things that you'll find when you're using things like PowerFX calculated columns is that those values don't persist. They change dynamically based on the formula that you've written and the other columns they're referencing in the app. And so those are some of the considerations that you would bring into, should I use this or should I write a plugin or do this in another way? And then lastly, the citizen devs are empowered to solve their business challenges. So we've reached the end of our time together. Thank you all so much for your time and attention. Just to sum up, I believe that we're at an inflection point in terms of this shortage of developers, that PowerFX is going to be absolutely critical in closing the app gap between the apps we need as a society and the number of developers available to build them. And it's doing this by freeing up pro devs to solve really hard problems, giving choice to functionals when we're architecting solutions, and empowering citizen devs to go out and create apps to solve their problems. And again, I see this as a much bigger deal than ChatGPT, just because of the things that it's going to empower and enable. So thank you all so much for your time, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Hey Nathan, just me again.
Yep.
Um, so with that Chat GPT integration, so did
hmm
you not play around with Azure AI services?
Yeah, so I did look into that on Sunday night, and I was hoping to be able to use my MSD and Azure credits,
I see.
but you actually have to sign up and get approval from Microsoft. So I did that. Mine just came through this morning. They say it takes up to 10 days, but yeah, so I will be looking at running that in Azure because again, that gives you some really exciting capabilities like being able to, kind of run your own models with that to keep your own data separate from it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And other thing is, like you said, it's better than the Chat GPT, the PowerFX.
Yep.
Like I know that I can see the value of like writing formulas within model driven, which
Yep.
is really cool, and we like that idea of yeah, the PowerFX as well as the Dataverse formulas.
Yep.
But how do you see overall like this is something? Why do we need to have Dataverse formulas? I know there's a
Yep.
different purpose, right?
hmm
But eventually you are doing the same thing within the PowerFX
Yep.
inside the command bar. And
Yep.
is there something like, do you see in the big picture, is it like going to be as a one-off, or do you want that as a separate thing?
Um, yes. So just to make sure that I'm clear, so you're asking why I think PowerFX is a bigger deal than ChatGPT?
Yeah, that's one
Yeah.
thing. And then
Yep.
the Dataverse formulas and then PowerFX, two
Yep.
places with
Yep.
a different purpose, but the functionality
Yep.
is same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I see PowerFX as a bigger deal than ChatGPT just because it's going to empower so many people to go out and create apps that they need, which is going to free up pro devs to go solve really hard problems. So, when we can empower so many more people to go out and create apps, I get overwhelmed when I think about how many cool things will become available to us. So that's why I see this as a bigger deal than ChatGPT. In terms of how you use it, whether you use a command or a calculated column, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So sometimes you just need data to be transformed or calculated or displayed in a certain way, and that's when you'd use a calculated column. Sometimes you need to do something. I need to create a row. I need to um, launch a website or something like that, and that's when you would use a PowerFX command in the ribbon. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And is
Yeah,
there
Nathan, Raghavan and
Hi.
Nathan, I have a question. So
Sure.
yeah, Raghu, yeah, go.
it's a good overview, Nathan. And my question after listening to this is, so is this going to replace PowerFX? Is going to replace anything that we are
Yep.
currently
That
using?
that's a very good question. So, yeah, I guess so there's kind of two areas, right? So you've got traditional calculated columns that we use today in
Yep.
model-driven apps, and then you've got legacy commands. So legacy commands are still there, whether or not they get replaced. Yeah, I guess I did see a video last year with Scott Durow and some of the other MVPs and product people at Microsoft, and they were talking about um, looking at porting some of either porting modern commanding capability into the legacy commands or converting legacy commands into modern commands. So I suspect we're probably going to see that happen at some point.
Yep.
In terms of the calculated columns, that's a really interesting one.
Mm.
Probably the best comparison I could make would be classic workflow versus Power Automate. And
Mm.
we've been told for ages that classic workflow is going away, but it never seems to. Um, and it persists. It persists because there's so many people that use it, and it does offer those real-time options. So yeah, I'd say stay tuned. Um,
Mhm.
I think I think what you'll probably see is as people are able to do an increasing number of functions with the calculated columns, you'll just see stuff kind of move into those over time. So
Okay.
that's just my guess. So
Okay.
yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
We have one
And
more question
yep,
from Andrew.
Hey, Nathan, thank you so much for your presentation. It's
sure.
really cool to see how PowerFX is being used. But as
Yeah,
Raghavan
welcome.
told you, I'm quite new when it comes
Yep,
to Power Platforms.
yep,
And I kind of come from a background of like other programming, like I've done a bit of
hmm
Python and a bit of all that.
yep,
And it's been really easy to just kind of like Google, like if I had a problem, let's say if I just needed
yep,
to look at like certain functions or how to use them, it's
yep,
been really easy to just Google that. And usually
yep,
there's like a directory with all of the terms.
yep. So are
I'm
you
wondering,
referring to PowerFX ones or Python ones?
like Python ones, that's what I'm
Oh,
saying,
okay,
like
yep, yep,
coming from that, like the Stack Overflow and all that.
yep,
And kind of coming into Power Platform, I've found that there isn't as much
yep,
kind of help, or there isn't as much
yeah,
Google things. I also kind of try to do some chat GPT to try to solve my problems, and it hasn't really been helpful. So what would you recommend as a good place to look? Where do you go to find all of the ways to basically use PowerFX?
Good question. So there is not a lot of PowerFX content out there just yet. I'm hoping that'll change. I'm hoping that we'll see kind of a explosion of it, like we have for powerautomate and other parts of the Power Platform. What I do is you just kind of have to get hands-on with it, unfortunately. The good news is that because it is strong typed and declarative, and you've got IntelliSense, you can kind of right away see, does this work or not? So you don't have to go write the code and compile it and deploy it and then go, oh no, we got a bug. Like, immediately when you're typing it in the IntelliSense, it lets you know whether it's going to work or not, which is cool. The Microsoft Docs are very useful in terms of the functions and what they do. Where probably my biggest drawback is the examples are generally overly simplistic. Like, one of my biggest beefs is, when you're talking about arrays, and they're like, okay, so we'll have an array of chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, and it's like, nobody's ever done that in the history of arrays. Like, I need an array that's going to, I need something much more complicated. And it's very hard to find content around that. I've tried to do a little bit of it, but it's kind of trial and error. But looking at the docs and kind of getting your head around the function, and then just trial and error combining it, has kind of been the way I've learned it. I've also found, just following the PowerFX hashtag on LinkedIn, I got some really good ideas from people there. I did find a really good blog earlier today on the Dataverse actions, because that's something that nobody was talking about. And so I'm going to try and get a bit more hands-on with that. But you're right that there's not a lot of content out there. So but if you do have specific questions, ping me on LinkedIn. I'm always looking for ideas of stuff to try out in my dev environment and blog about later. So feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn if you have any questions. I'm always keen for a challenge. So
sweet. No, thank you so much. So trial and error, and start with Microsoft Docs, and hopefully lead somewhere. Cool. Thank you.
No worries.
And as I said, like Andrew is really onto it, and he's I think you met Anushka as well. They are all experienced people now growing in PowerFX area, which is really cool. And guys, I already pasted some of the URLs of Nathan, like all his social things, Twitter, YouTube, and his LinkedIn. Please feel free to follow Nathan, and he's the rock star in PowerFX currently across the globe, one of the key experts in PowerFX. And also, I would like to thank everyone. So we are running out of time, just 2 minutes away. But Nathan, it was super interactive, and as I said, like every time you are rocking, like it's so valuable for everyone in the community. I have seen some of the Microsoft people jumped into the call, which is really a good thing. So so that's really good news. And also, like, I would like to thank everyone who has attended today, and thank you for sending your time. Who is that? Do we have one more question? I dropped in a feedback forms URL. So if you guys have like a few minutes of your time, just rate yourself. I think we got a question from Naveen as well. What is that? There are some update if and remove if functionalities, the delegation things which is going on. Thanks, Naveen. So please feel free to drop in your feedback with that URL. Again, thank you everyone for joining, and we will be up and running next month with someone, like some exciting sessions from some of the key experts. Thanks again, Nathan. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Raghavan. Thanks, everyone. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.